Easter Saturday is a rather strange place between the suffering and the sacrifice of Good Friday, where Jesus is crucified and he dies, and then the victory of Easter Sunday and the resurrection morning. And yet it's a place where we know that Jesus himself in his spirit has ascended into heaven. He's in paradise with his Father, even though his body has been laid in a tomb. And there is a sense in which the victory has been achieved. But there's this wonderful therefore moment, and it's expressed in Paul's letter to the Philippians, which is a letter that in our church we've been working our way through this spring. And it describes the humiliation of Christ. Being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God has highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name that is above every name. And God does that through the resurrection of Jesus. And what Paul is saying to us here is we have the perfect Saviour. Jesus is the Saviour who will never disappoint us. In the Bible, the Apostle Paul uses a concept which is quite interesting, and the concept of the first Adam and the second Adam. The first Adam was Adam, who married Eve in the Garden of Eden, who was the first created man and who was created perfect, as was Eve, without any sin, created in the image of God, to know God, to relate to God, to glorify God, to serve God. But he failed. The first Adam was an abject failure, and because he rebelled and he fell into sin, therefore he died, and he passed on the inheritance of that to the whole human race. Jesus is the second Adam, and he, rather than failing like the first Adam, he has succeeded. He has lived a perfect life. He has satisfied all the requirements of God. And there is this contrast between the first Adam and the second Adam. And what we have here in Philippians 2 verses 5 to 11, which is one of the most famous passages of the Bible, is, if you like, the setting out of the second Adam. Jesus has perfectly lived up to what a human being should be. And you can, if you like, take that statement of what Jesus did and sort of flip it round and look at the first Adam and say, he was a failure. The first Adam wanted to be like God. He was made in the image of God, but he wanted to take God's place. He wanted to exalt himself and use all his rights and privileges to his own advantage. And therefore he came under the curse of death, and his life was a failure. The second Adam, Jesus, he was not just created in God's image like the first Adam. He is God. He is the image and glory of God become man. But having found himself to be a man, he didn't use his deity to his own advantage. Instead, he took the form of a servant. That's the language that Paul uses here. He didn't consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage, but he emptied himself. He laid aside all the outward forms of glory, and he took the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. And being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. That's Good Friday. And then Paul says, therefore God has highly exalted him. And what's going on here is that we are between Good Friday and Easter Sunday. The work is finished. And what we're waiting for now is for God to say, well done. And the resurrection of Jesus tells us that God has fully accepted everything Jesus did on the cross. The resurrection tells us that his work is completely satisfactory. He's lived a perfect life as that second Adam. And now he's died a terrible death, taking all the sins of the first Adam and his descendants upon himself and bearing their punishment. And therefore God the Father has accepted his death. And the resurrection says, therefore God has received him and welcomed him, and it's all complete and perfect. Now, why do I mention that? It's because in our society we are always looking for heroes. We're looking for people we can trust in and not be disappointed. Some people put their confidence in celebrities, others in politicians, others in academics, a whole range of different people that we trust. and we are usually always bitterly disappointed and let down. We end our lives, if that's how we live, hugely disillusioned with the human condition. But if we put our trust in Jesus, we are trusting in someone who will never disappoint us. And the message of the Easter morning is that he who humbled himself even to the point of death, to death on a cross for us, he himself is perfectly obedient. He has satisfied every demand that his Father has given him. He's fulfilled the mission his Father has given him. And the resurrection says, this is the perfect Saviour. This is the one who can take away sin. This is the one who can show us what a true human life should be like. This is the one who can give us new life. This is the one whose power can change every aspect of our daily lives. Maybe you're looking for a hero. You're looking for someone to trust in. There is no one else, anywhere else, who will ever satisfy you. But Jesus will. He is the perfect Saviour. And you should come and trust him, especially in this time of great trouble and great fear of death. And if you're a Christian, why is Jesus your best kept secret? Why don't you talk about him? Why are you embarrassed to talk about your faith in front of others? Jesus is the perfect Saviour. Everybody out there needs to hear about him. And you know him. So you can talk about the difference that he's made in your life. This Easter, we can rejoice in the resurrection of a perfect Saviour.